Wet tarmac, a row of long-bonneted coupés outside a Midlands factory gate, chrome catching grey light. In the 70s, this wasn't a rare sight, it was ordinary British motoring. Ford, Vauxhall, Triumph, Jensen, TVR, every one of them built a two-door coupe promising a little glamour on an ordinary wage. Some sold in their hundreds of thousands. Some were hand-built by the dozen. All of them shared a fast backline, a low roof, and a bonnet built for looking fast even parked outside a chip shop. Then, one by one, they vanished from British roads entirely. Let's begin with number 10. Number 10, Vauxhall Firenza. Launched in 1971, the Vauxhall Firenza gave Luton something it had never really had before, a genuine two-door coupe with proper fastback styling, sitting above the boxy Viva in the range. Engines ran from a modest 1159cc up to a punchy 2279cc unit in later cars, and for a moment it looked like Vauxhall had cracked the formula. But there was a problem hiding beneath that handsome shape. Vauxhalls of this era were notorious rust magnets, and the Firenza's thin-gauge steel gave corrosion every opportunity it needed. Built at Ellesmere Port between 1970 and 1975, the car found unlikely fame on the racetrack instead, driven hard by Jerry Marshall in Old Nail and Baby Bertha. Road cars, though, had no such glory. Winters ate them alive, and by the 80s survivors were scarce. Today, the Firenza is rarely seen on British roads, a coupe that raced its way into folklore while quietly rusting into obscurity everywhere else. Number 9, Vauxhall Magnum. A step up from the Viva HC it was built on, the Vauxhall Magnum Coupe arrived in 1973 offering genuine pace with 1759cc and 2279cc overhead cam engines, wrapped in respectable, understated styling. It sold well enough on British driveways for a while. It felt like a sensible move up the ladder for buyers who wanted something sharper than the norm. But then came the same old enemy. Vauxhall's rust reputation followed the Magnum everywhere it went, attacking sills, wheel arches and floors with quiet efficiency. Built at Ellesmere Port until 1978, it was eventually replaced by the Cavalier, a car with a far tougher grip on British memory. And that's exactly where the Magnum story turned sad. Overshadowed by its successor, unloved by classic buyers for decades, and vulnerable to corrosion from new, the Magnum Coupe slipped away almost unnoticed. Once common on British driveways, it's now barely remembered at all. Number 8, Jensen GT. Introduced in 1975, the Jensen GT sat alongside the mighty Interceptor as something smaller and sharper, built on Jensen Healey mechanicals, with a 1973cc Lotus engine and a 5-speed get-rag gearbox giving it genuine driver appeal beneath its shooting brake coupe shape. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Jensen was already buckling under financial pressure, and the GT arrived just as the company's fortunes were collapsing entirely. Production limped along for barely a year before Jensen Motors folded, taking the GT down with it. What happened next was almost inevitable. With so few built, parts became scarce almost immediately, and many surviving cars were quietly broken for spares to keep Jensen Healeys running instead. The GT never had the chance to build a following, let alone a reputation of its own. Now exceptionally rare, the Jensen GT remains one of British motoring's shortest, saddest footnotes, a coupe barely given the chance to be forgotten before it was gone. Number 7, Triumph GT6. Debuting in production form back in 1966 and continuing well into the 70s, the Triumph GT6 wore a long fastback bonnet that hinted at something sportier than the Spitfire it was based on. Under that bonnet sat a smooth 1998cc straight six, giving genuine pace and styling by Michelotti that made comparisons to the E-Type feel entirely fair. Yet there was a problem the reviews couldn't ignore. Early GT6s suffered genuine handling issues with their swing-axle rear suspension, and although later Mark II and Mark III versions fixed much of this, the damage to reputation lingered. Sales never matched Triumph's hopes, and production quietly ended in 1973. Would you have chosen the GT6 over its bigger rivals? Few did at the time, and fewer still kept theirs running as rust and parts shortages took hold through the decade. Today, genuine GT6s are rarely seen on British roads, a handsome coupe that time simply moved past. Number 6. MGB GT. Designed by Pininfarina and combining roadster performance with genuine practicality, the MGB GT offered a 1.8-litre engine, a proper hatchback boot, and everyday usability the open MGB Roadster simply couldn't match. Through the early 70s it became a fixture of British driveways, the sensible sports car for families who still wanted some flair. But the decade wasn't kind to it. Emission regulations gradually blunted performance, and by mid-decade the notorious rubber bumpers arrived, changing the GT's proportions and dividing opinion sharply among loyal owners. Underneath, though, the real enemy was rust, quietly working through sills and floors on cars driven daily through British winters. And here's where the story turns unexpectedly. Despite huge production numbers, ordinary usable GTS were scrapped by the thousand once parts and bodywork became uneconomical to repair. Today, genuinely original examples are far scarcer than most people assume, a familiar face that quietly thinned out over time. Number 5. TVR 2500M. Built by hand in Blackpool, the TVR 2500M carried Triumph's smooth 2.5-litre straight-six, borrowed straight from the TR6, along with that car's brakes, gearbox and differential. Wrapped in fiberglass bodywork and finished with a wood-effect dash, it gave buyers a genuinely quick, genuinely British alternative to continental coupes at a fraction of the price. But the next chapter tells a different story. Most of TVR's 70s production was shipped straight to America, leaving relatively few 2500MS on British roads to begin with. Those that stayed home faced everything small manufacturers' cars usually did: patchy part support, unfamiliar mechanics, and fiberglass bodies that hid rusting steel chassis rails beneath. And here's the twist most people miss. Because so few were ever sold domestically, the 2500M never had the chance to become common in the first place. Today it's exceptionally rare on British roads, not because it disappeared, but because it barely arrived at all. Number 4. Ford Capri Mark I. Launched in 1969 and built at Halewood near Liverpool, the Ford Capri Mark I offered everything from a humble 1600cc four-cylinder to a genuinely quick 3000 GT V6, letting ordinary British buyers choose their own slice of Mustang-inspired glamour on a Cortina-sized budget. But the next chapter wasn't so simple. Early Capris rusted with alarming speed, their thin panels no match for British salt and rain, and many were driven hard, modified heavily, or simply used up entirely by owners chasing that V6 thrill. The Capri wasn't a car people kept, it was a car people wore out. And here's the twist. Despite being genuinely everywhere throughout the early 70s, standard unmodified Mark I's became remarkably scarce within a decade, swallowed by rust, banger racing, and endless customization. Today, an original Mark I Capri is far rarer than its reputation as Britain's favorite affordable coupe would ever suggest. Number 3. Ford Granada. Sold through British Ford dealers in top-line gear specification, the Ford Granada Coupe offered something the ordinary Granada saloon couldn't: a genuinely elegant two-door shape wrapped around the same solid range of engines, giving executive car comfort a sportier, more youthful edge. For a while, it felt like Ford had found a genuine niche, a coupe that let company car drivers feel special without stepping outside the Ford badge entirely. But British buyers, it turned out, preferred practicality to style in this segment, and the Granada Coupe never sold anywhere near the numbers of its saloon sibling. Then rust and low residual values did their usual work. Unloved, once outdated, Granada Coupes were scrapped readily as replacement Sierras took over Ford showrooms entirely. Would you have picked the coupe over the saloon? Few British buyers did at the time, and today the Granada Coupe is a genuine rarity, remembered mostly by devoted Ford enthusiasts. Number 2. Jensen Interceptor. Hand-built at West Bromwich in 1975, the rare fixed-head Interceptor coupe variant sat alongside the more familiar hatchback saloon, Touring's elegant lines wrapped around a thunderous American V8. With performance figures that embarrassed many contemporary sports cars, it represented British GT motoring at its most theatrical: leather, walnut, and effortless power for those who could afford it. But behind the glamour, trouble was brewing. The 1973 oil crisis devastated demand for thirsty V8 Grand Tourers just as Jensen's finances were already fragile, and the company collapsed into receivership by 1976. The rare coupe variant, built for barely a year, was caught directly in that collapse. What happened next was almost brutally quick. Production simply stopped, dealer stock dried up, and with so few coupes ever built, survival became a matter of luck as much as care. Now exceptionally rare, the Interceptor Coupe stands as a reminder of how quickly British glamour could disappear entirely. Number 1. Triumph TR7. And here it is, the car that really was everywhere. Launched in 1975 with Harris Mann's controversial wedge styling dividing opinion on every driveway from Coventry to Cardiff, the Triumph TR7 Coupe had no convertible rival until 1979, meaning the coupe was the TR7 for years. Britain bought it in genuinely huge numbers. But then the story turned. Built first at Speke, then Canley, then Solihull, the TR7 became a byword for British Leyland's chaotic quality control, with strikes and inconsistent assembly undermining a car that deserved better. Rust, familiar as ever, finished what poor build quality started. And here's the twist that makes this disappearance so striking. A car once utterly ordinary parked outside every other house, it sometimes felt became something people were almost embarrassed to keep. Survivors thinned dramatically, and today the once ubiquitous TR7 Coupe is a genuinely uncommon sight on British roads. 10 coupes, once utterly ordinary, now almost ghosts on British roads. They sat outside terraces, filled factory car parks, and carried families to the seaside without anyone imagining they'd become rare. Rust, changing tastes, hard driving, and simple bad luck did the rest, quietly erasing cars nobody thought to protect. That's how ordinary motoring becomes history, not through one dramatic ending, but through decades of small, unnoticed departures. Which one do you remember seeing outside your own house? If you enjoy stories about the British cars that time forgot, there are plenty more waiting here on Britain Rewind.